Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight, Black History Month, Unique Stories. For tonight's segment, we invited history professors and staff from 3 different Utah universities to share their favorite Black history stories with us. We also asked them to reflect on what their history and identity mean to them. Earlier today, we spoke with Dr. Ronald Coleman via Zoom, Professor Emeritus of History at the University of Utah. Check it out.
There were 3 African-American individuals who came with Brigham Young and the pioneers. They were Green Flake, Oscar Crosby, and Hart Lay. What can you tell us about their importance to Utah's history?
Well, I think that from the outset of the arrival of the Latter-day Saint pioneers, there is a Black presence. These 3 men, and there would have been more except 2, had died en route to winter quarters before the Brigham Young party left winter quarters area in the Midwest and came west into what we now know as Utah. And they were sent to accompany President Young by their respective owners. They were slaves belonging to some of the Latter-day Saint converts who had joined in the South and were encouraged to send some help as they prepared to come west.
Before the Civil War, Utah was a slave territory. Take us back to that time.
Yes, in the aftermath of the Mexican-American War, when the United States acquired what was via the Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo, when the United States acquired the land, which the Latter-day Saints later stopped, and Brigham Young declared this is the place, some of the individuals who were members of the church were Southern converts, and they sent servants, as they've been referred to, but they were slaves, to join the group, and they left winter quarters, which is in the Midwest near Nebraska, and journeyed west in 1846 in 1847.
After the Civil War, there were Black soldiers at Fort Douglas. They were called the Buffalo Soldiers. Let's talk about the contribution they had to Utah's history.
Well, the soldiers who came to Utah in 1896 were not Buffalo Soldiers initially. They were members of the 24th Infantry. And they had, there were at that time 4 Black regiments, the 24th and the 25th Infantry and the 9th and 10th Cavalry. It was the cavalry soldiers who were commonly referred to as the Buffalo Soldiers. And they spent, that's because of the time that they had spent out in the West and the familiarity that the indigenous Native Americans had of them, and the wool, and they combined their perception of them physically, and they thought that the hair, the extended hair of the Black soldiers reminded them of the woolly-like mane of the buffalo, so hence out of that comes the term Buffalo Soldiers, which the soldiers took a great deal of pride in. Those are the 2 cavalry infantries, the 9th and the 10th Cavalry, and the 9th Cavalry arrived first in 1886, and they helped to build the fortification that came to be known as Fort Duchesne. And those soldiers were there for about approximately 12 years before they went to participate in the Spanish-American War.
You wrote and published an essay in the Peoples of Utah. In the last paragraph, you wrote, quote, "Blacks have lived in Utah for more than 1.25 centuries and in the United States for more than 3.5 centuries. During these years, progress has been limited to individuals and not to the race as a whole. In considering the historical experience of Blacks in Utah and the United States, encompassing the struggle from slavery and the continuing quest for human rights, one is reminded of words uttered by a female slave of the 19th century. Oh, Lord Jesus, how long, how long?" What does that paragraph mean to you now?
How long? And Dr. King left us with that. He said not long. But here we are in 2021, dealing with some of the same issues that have been going on all of my life. I, as a child of the post-World War II era, and a beneficiary of the civil rights struggles of the 50s and 60s, thought that we would have been much further along as a nation and living up the full meaning of our creed that all persons are created equal and endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, the rights to liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But as we look around us today, we're in deep trouble. We're in deep trouble. I have hope for the future. And I would like to see us go back to a time when we're reminded of what has made us what we've become as a nation. I can't remember the last time I sang the words, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land of my father's pride, of the pilgrim's pride, land where my fathers died. From every mountainside, let freedom ring." We need to go back and talk about and re-embrace those things that express our commonality, not our differences, because we're more alike one another than we are different.
Dr. Coleman, thanks for making time to be part of our show on Black History Month. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on Black History Month Unique Stories. Joining us now live via Zoom is Kenneth Johnson, advisor for the African American Heritage Initiative at Weber State University. Kenneth, we appreciate you making time to be part of our discussion. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Ken, let's start our conversation out with talking about your favorite Black history story. Which is one that you'd like to share?
There's a bunch of stories, but the main one I want to focus on is an event that took place back in November of 2019. It was called My African Identity from Nostalgia to Authentic Self, The Reveal. And what it was a student affairs, Weber State Student Affairs underrepresented grant that was provided to my group. And with Michiko Nakashima and Dr. Forrest Crawford helped me put it together. And with that funding, we was able to get 10 students DNA tested. Not just your regular DNA test, a test from African ancestry. There's people have heard of Ancestry.com and 23andMe, and those companies have about 3,000 African samples. But African Ancestry has over 30,000 African samples. And because of that, you can not only find your country of origin in Africa, but also your tribe. And so we had the co-founder of African Ancestry fly down and actually reveal the results to these 10 students to find out their origin, where they were from. And that just sense of belonging and knowing who you are was such a powerful moment. And it was an awesome event. But what I realized after having that event is that most African Americans do not know their identity. When I say do not know their identity, they don't know their identity to be pre-slavery. And so that was my favorite Black history story.
Ken, what a unique event. What does it mean to you, or maybe those that participated in their event, to know like their identity?
Yeah, identity, and I don't want to say this is Ken Johnson's verbiage, because there was a lot of great psychologists and teachers like Afia Mbilishaka, Frantz Fanon, Francis Cress Welding, Thomas Parham, Wade Nobles, Amos Wilson, Cynthia E. Winston Proctor. These great psychologists and teachers, they classified identity as memories, experiences, and relationships. And so you're the author of who you are. And when you understand that, you have a connection to your heritage. And from there, you can begin to understand what your identity is. So to be African means to belong to a culture of origin. So what house am I from? I got tested as well. So I'm from Sierra Leone and the Mende tribe. So I know my house of origin. And how does your identity evolve over time? If you'd asked me more than before 2019, I would have said I'm from Texas and I'm from Louisiana. But now I can say I'm from Sierra Leone and I'm from the Mende tribe. So I have a whole nother culture that I'm a part of, and that's how my identity has evolved over time. And I would say that's how I would say what I believe identity means to me.
That's so meaningful. How does someone have or maintain a healthy identity?
Okay, great question. A lot of times people have a Western philosophy and an Eastern philosophy, but as African Americans, we have to have an Afrocentric philosophy when it comes to identity. And those Afrocentric questions you have to ask yourself in order to have a healthy identity is, who am I? Am I who I say I am? And am I all I ought to be? And between those, that's how culture and alignment comes together. And you begin to navigate your mental health by understanding those things. You begin to have a self-knowledge of who you are, and you begin to understand what culture really means. And what culture really means is design for living and patterns for interpreting reality. And that's how you have a healthy identity.
Ken, how do you practice your culture?
Well, I think there's 5 steps in order to practice your culture. One is name. What is your name? What does your name mean to you? My name is Ken. It means handsome. But as far as your cultural name, your name, your history, what does that name mean to you? Can you find that name? What does that name mean? Your language, your culture, your connection to language. What does that mean as far as you understand your history of that? Clothing. What does clothing mean to you when you talk about your ancestry and the meanings of those fabrics? And then food. What foods are you eating that are essential to your culture? Because gut health is big, and as African American, there's certain foods you can eat that can affect you. So that's important too. And then the last thing is, what is your spiritual practices and beliefs, and what do those mean as from your ancestors as fall? And when it's all said and done, you have to have a pride in who you are. And when you have a healthy pride, you have a healthy person. So just have pride in yourself and be healthy.
This is such an insightful interpretation of culture, history, and identity. You've been hearing from Kenneth Johnson, advisor for the African American Heritage Initiative at Weber State University. Ken, thanks for being a part of our discussion tonight on Black History Month. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here.
Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on Black History Month, Unique Stories. Joining us now live via Zoom is Dr. Rebecca DeSchweinitz, Associate Professor of History at Brigham Young University. Rebecca, thanks for joining our discussion tonight. It's great to have you.
It's great to be here, thanks.
Rebecca, when it comes to Black history, what are some stories that you like to think about, or maybe one that stands out to you?
Well, I really love stories that get us to rethink things that we think that we already know about. So when we think about the story of Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott, right, we think we know the story. There's a tired woman who refuses to give up her seat one day, this kind of accidental activist that then launches this big movement. But that's a really simplistic narrative that doesn't capture who Rosa Parks was or how change happens. So the real Rosa Parks had actually been at the center of civil rights organizing in Montgomery for more than a decade. She's involved with voter registration efforts. She herself is a registered voter in the 1940s and 50s, and that's not something that easily happens in a city like Montgomery. She's been involved with other campaigns to integrate things and to capture the testimonies of Black women who have been the victims of sexual racial violence. And so she's really already in the center of the movement and making things happen there in Montgomery. And when she gives up her seat on that day in Montgomery, she knows that there are folks who are already ready to mobilize and to make her individual action into something that can really affect change, into a mass movement.
I love that you bring that up, because that moment on the bus is a pivotal moment, but it doesn't encompass, right, the scope of her contribution to the civil rights movement. Now, I understand that you studied young people in African American history. What stories stand out to you in regards to that angle?
Yeah, great. So even in the Montgomery story, we don't know about the students at Alabama State who were really central to making that movement successful, that it's young people who are mimeographing the flyers that are spreading the word about the boycott. And it's young people who are some of the key bus riders. And so their boycott of the buses, you know, is really central to the success of that movement. Probably one of my most favorite stories, though, is of a 16-year-old high school student named Barbara Johns. And she and her friends are in Prince Edward County, Virginia. This is the rural South, right? And they had been watching adults in their community kind of struggle to improve conditions at the local Black schools. And Barbara attends school board meetings. She's watching them unsuccessfully try to negotiate they're going to school in tar paper shacks and they don't have heaters and they're getting secondhand books and sports equipment, right? This is the state of Black education in the South under segregation. And she sees what's happening and she's impatient with change and sees that the grown-ups aren't getting anywhere. And so she comes up with a plan to have a student strike. And she enlists the help of student club leaders and team captains and uses these peer networks to plan a strike. They make posters ahead of time, and then one day at school, she orchestrates this event to have the school principal called away from the school so that he can't stop what she has planned. And they get the students into an impromptu assembly, and she presents this plan that we've got to go on strike and really make things happen. Our parents aren't seeing any success. After she gets the help of students kind of on board, she contacts the NAACP and enlists their help, and then goes back to community adults and convinces them to support the student strike. She gives this really impassioned speech and convinces parents saying, you know, adults ask us to follow them, but in some instances, a little child shall lead them. And then this case from Prince Edward County, Virginia, that's initiated by high school students goes all the way to the Supreme Court and is one of 5 cases that's included in the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education ruling that dismantled segregation.
Wow, just incredible. You can't underestimate the young voices and the young passions. Rebecca, we have about a minute left. I'd really love to get to this question. How can young people today play a role in history?
Yeah, well, I think that young people have this idealism and an ethical spirit. And just like young people in the civil rights movement, they're often impatient with change and aren't as kind of bound by constraints as adults are. So they can kind of cut through and see a way forward when sometimes older people can't.
Well said. You've been hearing from Dr. Rebecca de Schweinitz, Associate Professor of History at Brigham Young University. Rebecca, thank you so much for your time tonight. We appreciate you being part of our discussion.
Sure.